PME Headquarter. Good morning, Ms. Nora. Thank you so much for joining us here on Voice of Indonesia's Voitalk.
Good morning, and also good morning to Afrhill, all the way in Kuala Lumpur. Thank you for having me here.
So happy World Red Cross and Red Crescent Day 2025, where we keep humanity alive. It is a call to celebrate humanitarian workers, to those who give their time and sometimes even their lives to ease the suffering of others. Now, we would like to know your view on how this theme is important, why this theme is important to be highlighted this year. The first one, please, Afrhill, can you share your view about the importance of this theme this year?
Thank you, Rama. I would also like to mention that it is not that far from the theme of last year, which is Keep Humanity Alive, and this year it's on the side of humanity. As you know, the humanitarian sector has been facing a lot of challenges, and I think it's in this day and age that the support and the solidarity is of utmost importance to make sure that the government, the public, the media are also understanding what the key role of the humanitarian sector is and what the role that the humanitarian workers are doing. So as you have seen in the news as well, I'm sure all of us who are watching our today's show is also aware with all these attacks to humanitarian workers. And so we would like to highlight through this theme this year, keeping humanity alive, to make sure that we get to position ourselves in terms of the importance and the essential delivery of services that we are doing on the ground. The Red Cross and Red Crescent movement has its strength of network of staff and volunteers in almost every community on the planet. And through this work, we are able to assist and provide support to those who are in vulnerable situations, especially those who are being affected by disasters and conflict. And so that's why, for me, this is the importance of making sure that we get to amplify the theme of this year's World Red Cross and Red Crescent Day.
And Ms. Nora, how do you see the theme of this year's on the side of humanity?
All right. So this year actually also marks the 60th anniversary of the 7 guiding principle for the Red Cross. You know, there, as you know, is humanity, impartiality, neutrality, independence, voluntary service, unity, and universality. But that whole thing can only work if you do one thing first, and that's humanity. This is where we give our unwavering commitment to the millions of volunteers and to the staff worldwide that base our work during this. Without humanity, without making that as the foundation of all the other principles, none of our humanitarian action or none of the other principle can be made possible. So this is why this year, I believe, we bring up this theme of on the side of humanity as the basic and the foundation.
Now, when humanitarian workers are affected during their work in disaster or conflict-stricken areas, what things or steps are actually done by IFRC, for instance?
So our emblem, or the logo that you see, the Red Cross, the Red Crescent, and in some contexts, the Red Crystal, that is supposedly a protection in itself. But lately, I think especially when the conflict in the Middle East started, there has been a lot of killing and injuries that have been experienced by humanitarian workers. And so how do we protect our humanitarian workers who are also exposing their lives every day? My colleague here, Nora from the Indonesian Red Cross, also mentioned the presence of the volunteers on the ground and how humanity serves as our lifeline to make sure that we get to deliver our work despite all these challenges. So the IFRC, we have standards that we have in place to make sure that especially those who are volunteering for us have the safety, security, and well-being. So this has been streamlined across all our projects, programs where we engage volunteers in our work. And volunteerism is the heart of the Red Cross and the Red Crescent movement. In addition to that, we also provide them security awareness training. So it's mandatory to have that briefing, orientation, and training before any deployment, ideally. For some cases where they do not get this special package of training, it's because we rely on their awareness. So most of our volunteers are familiar within the context because they are coming from the villages or from the communities that they serve. And so we rely on that knowledge, that awareness and familiarity of the context. But of course, we make sure that we equip them with the standard safety and security awareness training. And also on the strategic level, the IFRC and the rest of the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, we continuously advocate for the protection of the humanitarian workers, especially calling for urgent action to ensure their safety and the rising crisis and disasters that we are all facing in the different parts of Asia Pacific and also globally.
And in the midst of humanitarian actions, if the workers, the volunteers need to be replaced, how to deal with that? It's part of the anticipation of IFRC.
Yes, thank you for that question, Rama. It is also a reality that we face that, of course, not everyone can be volunteering for a very long time, especially in this economy, in this recession. People also need something to as part of their livelihood and income. And so in some places, of course, there are some per diem or like daily allowance that we provide. But of course, we understand that eventually some of them will also have to find full-time work. But also, it's very heartwarming to know that many of them are really staying on. I have met some volunteers during my time in the Philippines, in Africa, who have been volunteering for at least 10 years. And this being in this sector is really about passion. If you do not have it, it's very hard to continue doing the work, even being a staff and also more so being a volunteer. And so when it comes to retention, we make sure that our campaigns or our activities on the ground, we try to be relevant as much as possible. The Red Cross Youth is also a big part of our component in the movement. And so by engaging continuously with the youth, finding out what are their needs, what the latest trends are in the sector and outside the sector, we remain relevant in making sure that we get to target those who are willing to volunteer. And it's also good to know that as of 2024, we have 16 million volunteers across the movement who keep the humanity alive in making sure that we get to deliver the work of the Red Cross and Red Crescent.
16 million volunteers. Okay. And what about from the Indonesian Red Cross, the workers and volunteers experience or any story that can be shared in doing humanitarian actions in disaster or conflict-stricken areas?
Well, again, like my colleague had mentioned, Afrhill, when volunteers go out into the field, most of them, we try to give them, the basic training. So at least they have the awareness, they have the tools needed. Unfortunately, again, when it's a conflict zone, when it's, not very safe for them, things happen. But we try to do like with the emblems, with their trainings. And then when they come back, we do give what we call the social support, or PFA, psychosocial first aid, we call it. So it's not even first aid for physical needs, but it's actually for the emotional, for their mental health. And those kind of things are what we try to provide so that when our volunteers and our staff go out into the field and do what they're passionate about and give their heart and give their energy, they could also come back and still perform in their daily lives. And they can also come back and feel good about it and not actually get drained so that they won't want to come back. You know what I mean? And so, because I think when we go to some areas, even in Indonesia, as you'd mentioned, is there any stories? When we did our humanitarian work originally in Papua, it wasn't that easy because of, conflicts within authorities and also conflicts or mistrust on the ground. And some of those stuff that happens have to be dealt with, gingerly or with a soft touch so that we can then end up reaching the people that are most vulnerable and reaching those who do need the help the most.
Okay. Emotional protection, that's I think another issue that needs to be highlighted here in protecting humanitarian workers. And what about international collaboration needed to maximize protection on humanitarian workers? Afrhill.
Thank you, Rama. I would also like to allude to what my colleague Nora said about the emotional and mental well-being. So in the IFRC, let's start with the region here. We have our hub in Hong Kong that leads the mental health and psychosocial support to humanitarian workers. It also applies to our staff and volunteers, where we hold regular conversations with them, how they can best be supported when it comes to stressful and being deployed to different scenarios of emergencies and conflict. Internationally, we have been very active. We are present in almost every major event or meeting. So, from the General Assembly of the UN in New York to COP 29, 30, or 28, whichever is happening on the climate change conference that the UN is hosting. We also make sure that we have key messages that are in place when the governments are meeting, such as the ASEAN and G7. In fact, this year, Malaysia is hosting the ASEAN. And so in Malaysia, we are trying to make sure that we include our messaging when it comes to the protection of humanitarian workers amongst the ASEAN countries in the region. But globally, yes, we have been very vocal. We have been very active in terms of advocating for the protection of the humanitarian workers. It's still a long way to go because daily we still hear news about a volunteer or a staff being killed or injured while on duty, which is very disheartening because the only intention of having that person or volunteer on the ground is to provide support to those who is not present for them. I have heard stories where, for example, in our work in Laos, there was a time where a woman said that it is her first time to see a Red Cross. And so in this day and age, we might think that, in the age of digital technology, that Red Cross should be known in every corner of the world, but it's not true. There's still a lot of work, and that is why our staff and volunteers who have their presence in the communities are spreading that awareness about the work of the Red Cross, and also in return, they must be protected. So it's a collective effort, both at the country and the regional, and also, of course, at the global level, that we are voicing our support to make sure that the protection of the staff and volunteers of the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement is being in place and, of course, being heard by the government, by the public, by the media, and all our stakeholders on the ground.
So the support here is not only during the humanitarian actions, but after the actions?
It's actually before, during, and after.
Before, during, and after. Okay. And from the Indonesian Red Cross, how the international collaboration has been going on to optimize these protection efforts?
So same thing, as Afrhill said, in every major disaster of a country that requires assistance from any other countries, the Indonesian Red Cross, or PMI, we provide aid in cooperation with other local national societies. And this rule applies to all members of the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. For example, in Gaza, PMI collaborates with the Egyptian Red Crescent to deliver aid to those in need. And assistance includes, tents, wheelchairs, food, medical supplies, and things that are of need at that situation. Even during the last major earthquake in Myanmar, PMI also worked with the Myanmar Red Cross by providing financial aids. Plans are underway to send our personnel specializing in water sanitation to Myanmar. There's PMI's water and sanitation team will be working with other experts to collaborate with teams from other national societies that are already present in Myanmar. So that's ongoing, and that's what we do. Even though every country has their own challenges at home, but we do remember our neighbor, and our friends and our family, and so we just reach our hand out whenever we are in need, because you never know, who needs what when. So let's just be all ready at the same time.
Okay, and what about the greatest barrier that makes it difficult of humanitarian workers reach the victims of, or the people need help?
April, would you like to take that, or?
Sure. So in terms of the challenges and the difficulties, like what I was saying earlier, and of course what Nora is saying in the Indonesian context, I think for Asia Pacific in general, because we are facing various types of disasters. And in the recent years, it has been unprecedented. And I'm sure Nora can also agree that for Indonesia, for example, and me from the Philippines, we are part of the Pacific Ring of Fire. So, earthquake has been happening a lot lately, volcanic eruptions. And then in between, we have typhoons. And then there are also these what we call man-made disasters, such as conflict, or there are also those big fires that are also being propelled by the ongoing heat waves. So it's really a lot for a humanitarian worker to to shoulder and to power through. And so I think also we are facing all these issues when it comes to, funding, because there's a lot of things that are happening, not just in Asia Pacific, not just in the countries, but also globally, right? So we are really competing for funding, for public attention, for media slots to make sure that whatever we are doing on the ground is being profiled, and whatever plans we have are also being heard by our potential donors and stakeholders. So I think the challenges are really a lot nowadays, and the amount of disasters that we are facing are also really unprecedented. And so it also requires those different types of approaches when it comes to addressing them. We have to be very creative when it comes to positioning ourselves, when it comes to requesting for funding, when it comes to being more accountable to whatever that we are receiving from our donors, that we are also reporting back, and making sure that we get to reach those who need aid the most.
And what about from the Indonesian Red Cross workers so far, how they face the barrier, the challenges when doing humanitarian actions?
Yeah, same thing with what Avrill said. A lot of our situations when we do face deployment, let's say, if there's any security risks, we have to take that into account. That sometimes prevent the teams from actually getting to the areas that needs to be addressed. Again, any political or any bureaucratic restrictions, sometimes permissions, get withheld, or sanctions get thrown out, border closure, and other delays that may not be natural, blockages, but they're there. Logistical issues, obviously. There's damaged roads in Indonesia a lot. There's remote locations in Indonesia. And there's lack of infrastructure that could make access very challenging. And so you have to go and, take that into account before you actually get to the space and get to the people that are most in need. And then, of course, there's also mistrust or misinformation, like Avrill was saying. We're here to help. We're here with the passion and the heart to make it easier for those who need the help and the support. But sometimes even the people that we want to help may not quite yet understand, why are you there? Who is this? Who are you? And what are you doing here? What do you want? Is there anything behind this? Why are you here? And so that sometimes have to be overcome before we could actually deliver the aid that we want to deliver. And as Avrill was saying, limited resources, lack of funding or lack of supplies, affect how fast and how quickly we could reach those people. And, back to the thing of, of this year, on the side of humanity, I think even though we have, this 60 million and whatnot volunteers, even for Indonesia itself, 1.5, let me please call out to say that volunteering or donating, it could be in so many ways. It could obviously be with financial support, but it could also just be with your thoughts, your body, your time, your mind, even your prayer, but that helps us get our intention out there, and our intention and our efforts easier on the ground. So, don't think, I don't have any money, I can't donate. Well, maybe you have time, or maybe you have a thought, maybe you have an idea. Maybe you have some teenagers in the community that rather than them doing something that is maybe not as useful as, let's go and join the youth force of the Red Cross, and see if you could donate your energy, donate your time, your creativity, which sometimes the maybe a more senior generation might be lacking of, the younger generation can provide. So these are all the stuff that can help with our work and the work of all national societies.
So never think that it's only governments, stakeholders can help humanitarian networks. Even all people can give aid, a donation, even through prayer. That also means a lot, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think the idea of PMI for this year was we were saying, and the board members, wouldn't it be awesome if everybody literally becomes a volunteer of PMI, of the Red Cross? And again, even companies can volunteer their people, can volunteer their time, their energy, their resources. But I mean, guess it could be us that could be needing the support one day, and it could be us that can deliver the support one day. So if you put it in that context, how wonderful, how amazing it would be if everybody was a volunteer. Because then everybody can help each other out, you never know, like that whole thing of the wheel keeps turning. Sometimes you're on top, sometimes you're on the bottom, and so we're available whenever phase we're in. I think that's kind of the idea.
Everybody noted.
Yes,
Highlight
everybody.
it and vote.
Yes.
Okay. So, how do IFRC and Indonesian Red Cross run the activities so far then with supports from facilities, funding, and so on from various parties? Ms.
So from the
Afrhill.
IFRC, yeah,
Yes.
from the IFRC, we have what we call the cluster delegation in Jakarta. So that office also covers Timor-Leste, Brunei, and Singapore, and in addition to our presence in Indonesia already. Also, the latest activities that we have had in Indonesia is from the Cianjur earthquake. I think this was in December 2022, and before that was the Palu Lombok operation in 2018. So the role of the IFRC on behalf of what we call the national societies or the local Red Cross that we have, in this case, the Palang Merah Indonesia in Indonesia, is to mobilize the funding and support on behalf of the national society. So once we have those funding that we raise, and by raising funds, we utilize various channels here by having bilateral conversations with our existing and potential donors, governments, embassies, and other private donors as well. So earlier we were talking about how a person or a company can also provide support every time there is an ongoing operation or what we call emergency appeal in the Red Cross if it's a large-scale disaster. And so the IFRC mobilized resources. So, in addition to those conversations that I just mentioned or meetings that we attend and we make time for, we also use the communication channels. So from my side, I support our partnerships team, our resource mobilization team by profiling the work of what we do. And so this is where I rely a lot on PMI because they are the ones who are usually deployed first on the ground. And so those survivor stories, our beneficiary stories, which are very important when it comes to providing that human side of any emergency response. And I think that's also what, of course, our donors are looking out for because how we are impacting these people whom we are helping is always the most important to hear and to profile and to make visible in various communication channels. So we also utilize the web, the traditional media, social media as well. I know there's a very, very active social media landscape in Indonesia that exists, which is also very helpful when it comes to, for example, domestic fundraising of PMI. And so that's how the IFRC supports our local Red Cross and Red Crescent. So in Asia Pacific, for example, we have 38 national societies, depending on the scale of the disaster. If it's large scale, if it has affected a lot of people, so for example, like what I mentioned for Indonesia, the Lombok earthquake, and then recently the Myanmar earthquake, that is where we have to mobilize money. And of course, there's also like in-kind resources. So for example, our other Red Cross, Red Crescent members are deploying their own people. So for example, we have what we call the surge team, the emergency response team, logistics, setting up human resources systems. How do we report? How do we write stories on the ground? So the IFRC supports our national societies, both or on the money side and of course on the in-kind resources side. And for Indonesia, we have also helped them in terms of their overall strategic direction. So there's a lot of support that we are providing, what we call the unified plan for the cluster, where we align our existing activities vis-a-vis the global goal or vision of the IFRC.
So with the Indonesian Red Cross itself, IFRC has future plans or ongoing cooperation or MOUs in the future.
Correct. So we have supported, for example, the PMI. We are supporting them because the process of developing the strategic plan for 2025 to 2029 is still ongoing. So I think, of course, there is a lot of that support wherever necessary. But I also would like to highlight here, the Palang Merah Indonesia is one of the strongest national societies that we have in the region. We do not really have to step in every time because, for example, the Cianjur earthquake, they managed to do it every time. And like what Nora is mentioning now, Indonesia Red Cross is one of our national societies who are also stepping up in terms of supporting our neighbors when it comes to disasters. And Indonesia Red Cross is one of the first ASEAN countries who stepped up when the Myanmar earthquake happened. So this is a really good trend that we are seeing in the region in terms of these national societies. You know, back in the day, in my case, for example, Philippine Red Cross, we used to be the recipient of aid, but nowadays, Philippine Red Cross, Palang Merah Indonesia are the ones providing aid, especially when there is something happening within the region. And so it's a really good practice that we have now. You know, I think all the lessons learned, because back in the day, we used to receive all those training, and now we are the ones providing and deploying our own people. So that definitely, despite the strength that the Palang Merah Indonesia Red Cross is showing us in the recent years, IFRC stands ready to support in case of any massive emergency that can occur in the region and also in Indonesia itself.
Sustainable cooperation. Okay. And what supports are mostly needed by the Indonesian Red Cross in doing the humanitarian actions? And so far, how do PMI run the humanitarian activities?
Well, again, you know, we are one of the biggest. I used to be very active with the Australian Red Cross before I moved back to Indonesia and with PMI. And what I do see is we do have a large infrastructure. One of the biggest capital in terms of resources we have is the human capital. We have this huge amount of volunteers, and what a great way it is when we could harness that and add to their knowledge, add to their skills, add to their specialty so that they can deliver even more pinpoint help and pinpoint action to what it is needed on the ground. And even if you say, so what else do you do, you know, for helping out? Aside from just that, I mean, giving blood, which is something sometimes people overlook, that is one of the big things that all national societies and Red Cross does. And I'm really happy to say that now in Indonesia, we can now start donating plasma, which is something just recently happening. Before, it was just whole blood, you know, so which means you could only donate every 3.5 months. With plasma, technically, you can donate every 2 weeks. I used to donate every once a month when I was in Australia, because that's a more strategic or a more pinpoint, precise help that people need. So PMI can maneuver or can move all these things. You could volunteer your physical time. You could also donate your blood, you know, if you're capable of doing that. Obviously, financially, you could also donate. And one of the things that you can donate, and I think this is sometimes overlooked, is raise awareness. Especially tomorrow, you know, with the World Red Cross Red Crescent Day, we have a hashtag on social media, because whether, you know, for the good and for the bad, the social media has a big impact. Media has a big impact in everything that we do. So, you know, we're trying to do a lot of public social awareness campaign. We're trying to get all the youth, especially, to post whatever it is that they do in their communities, or even, you know, in their schools, in their work, you know, and then hashtag it, you know, hashtag RCRC 2025, you know, or hashtag di pihak kemanusiaan, or hashtag on the side of humanity. And these kind of things can actually help to spread the message of how we work. And then it allows us to deliver more help and more support to those that are that is needed, not just in Indonesia, but as Afrhill said, around the region and even around the world, if so called for that.
Okay, the final statement, please, on the World Red Cross and Red Crescent Day. Your hope, your expectation from all people, from all parties, to ensure the protection on humanity workers, please, Ms. Afrhill and Ms. Nora. Please, Ms. Afrhill first.
Thank you, Rama. So from my side, I would just like to echo that in the face of adversity, the IFRC stands with all our staff and volunteers on the ground. Our commitment will always be there. It will remain unwavering to provide support, to alleviate suffering, and to uphold human dignity. We urge the global community to recognize and respect the international humanitarian law, ensuring the protection of all humanitarian workers and the people that they serve. Together, I believe that through this, we can build the resilience and foster a future where humanity prevails.
Yes, from Ms. Nora, Indonesian Red Cross, please.
Yes, thank you. So echoing what Afrhill said, through this year's theme, On the Side of Humanity, PMI invites everyone, and when I say everyone, I mean everyone, to stand on the side of humanity and work together to protect humanitarian space. Keep it safe, keep it open, and accessible to anyone in need. Because the power of the Red Cross movement here and everywhere comes from ordinary people doing extraordinary things. So whether you give your time, your skills, your thoughts, your resources, your blood, you are saving lives. And that's what matters. That's what humanity is all about.
Thank you so much. What hashtag that we can use on tomorrow's campaign?
So the hashtag that we would like you to use on the campaign are one, hashtag RCRC Day 2025, or hashtag di pihak kemanusiaan, or hashtag on the side of humanity.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Noraini Bawazier from the Indonesian Red Cross, and also Afrhill Rances from the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies in the Asia Pacific region. Once again, happy World Red Cross and Red Crescent Day 2025. Let's keep humanity alive.
Thank you, Rama. Thank you, April.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having us, Rama.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you so much. Well, listener, that's today's Voitalk on the World Red Cross and Red Crescent Day 2025, keeping humanity alive. Stay tuned for more inspiring, insightful talks on Voitalk from Voice of Indonesia, from Indonesia to the world.
Voice of Indonesia, the overseas service of Radio Republic Indonesia, broadcast in 9 language services: English, French, German, Dutch, Spanish, Arabic, Mandarin, Japanese, and Indonesian. Voice of Indonesia is broadcast via shortwave 3325 kHz and 4755 kHz, and via streaming on voinews.id and RRI Digital on mobile application. We present various programs for you: Diplomatic Forum, The Session, Indonesian Wonder, Miscellany, Let's Speak Bahasa Indonesia, Indonesian pop and regional songs, international musical entertainment, as well as news and information about Indonesia and abroad. Voice of Indonesia, from Indonesia to the world.